Grace for the introduction. So my name is Markus Helfert. I'm the director of the Innovation Value Institute. And what I thought today over a cup of coffee for the Coffee and Talk, I wanted to talk a little bit about some ideas on digital transformation paths and just also like discussing ideas, perspectives on this, how we can shape that. We at the Innovation Value Institute focus a lot on digital transformation, and we look how to structure that and making that shareable, making that knowledge more explicit through our portal, through our digital guidebook. So I thought it might be useful for a few minutes over a cup of coffee to discuss and share some ideas and hopefully also some feedback, comments, suggestions around this. So the discussion is probably more important for this afternoon on the Coffee and Talk than a presentation around this. So yeah, so there won't be too many results. It's more like kind of stimulating a discussion around these digital transformation paths. So there's no doubt that digital transformation is important, is significant. During the COVID crisis also changed a lot. And I just took one of the slides with some European Union context of the importance of digital transformation. So probably all enterprises, all organizations are somewhere now impacted by it, but it's also a lot of opportunities around digital transformation. So changing workflows, changing processes, changing how we interact between companies, also with customers, also how we automate certain processes, what we do with data. So I think data is key to this. And then also, of course, technologies, artificial intelligence, also the move towards maybe a more data economy, data value, data sharing. All of these topics are extremely important and also, of course, identified by the funding bodies like Horizon Europe, the European Union, SFI, Enterprise Ireland, but also companies. So what I want to say there is just, it is significant, it's big, it's a lot of opportunities, but it's extremely challenging as well. And I think one of the challenges is because of the many opportunities and the many possibilities to change and to shape the way forward. So is really to guide and to know at least what is an example of a certain transformation, examples because it's relatively new around this. And so this is kind of where we from the Innovation Value Institute try to focus on, to guide companies, help them with these strategic directions, strategic challenges around this, and help them along the digital transformation journey, the digital transformation paths. Of course, we also link with, for example, the European Union programs on data governance in the different sectors, particular Horizon Europe, that program on funding, that's quite important for us. And we're working always with industry together. So that's what IVI set out to do, to help to shape the future for companies around this and guide that. So we call that provide strategic guidelines for the digital transformation, because we have also training programs, but also working with companies together in working groups on different sectors. Retail, for example, is one, construction is one, health is one, where we try to establish a digital guidebook around this digital transformation paths. And that term digital transformation path, we talked about that probably 15, 18 months. So it was actually even probably starting before COVID, but we thought we need to structure that digital transformation journey with some more structured information, that we can make that shareable, that we make it more explicit and help that guiding of enterprises. And I used for the next slide a slide which I used before on around enterprise architecture. And why I used this was to show that dynamic evolution of enterprises along the continuum. And so basically different configuration of the enterprise, and we would call them then, if we model them, enterprise models, but around the enterprise, so the different strategies, different service portfolios, different technologies, different workflows, different processes, organizational structures. So the representation or the enterprise evolves along that digital transformation journey. And of course, the key question is on one side to organize and plan it and making it more standardized rules. And on the other side, of course, the extreme, less planning, no planning, more chaotic way. And of course, somewhere that needs to be balanced. And that's probably the key question around it. So how much stability we need and how much actually flexibility we need on the other side. And I think the architecting and that planning around that transformation path, that journey for the digital transformation, that's a key question. So how can we guide companies, enterprises along that journey with that entirety of the complexity of an enterprise and looking at certain aspects around that. And so I think that's a key question. Many researchers deal with that and trying to organize that and describing this. So there's for more kind of the system modeling, more the IT architecture, and then of course also on the other side, business models, ecosystems, and that describing this. And what we set out in the Innovation Value Institute is building on our expertise and our knowledge base. So you hardly can see it here on the left side. That's a comprehensive capability-based model where we have described, or where IVI has described over many years, capabilities, practices, ways of maturity from a lower maturity to a higher maturity in various areas, in 30 plus capability areas. And although that was initially tailored for IT, it's applicable with small adoption to the enterprise. So what we're trying to do is taking certain of these capability areas and looking along the transformation journey, which capabilities are first of all important, crucial to initiate digital transformation, and which one are important to mature, to increase, to look into, to foster and to accelerate the digital transformation. So in a visual, and I tried to visualize that a little bit on a digital transformation path. So basically looking at certain areas, certain possibilities, what we can change in the enterprise along a digital transformation path. So responding to a challenge, for example, moving to online, increasing customer experience, increasing connection in supply chain, and then responding to that by what we would call now a digital transformation path, by maturing, increasing certain areas, certain capability areas within the organization, within the enterprise. And this we tested this now with a number of companies around this on kind of smaller areas where we had a challenge, and then helped them to roadmap a path forward to, for example, using artificial intelligence, or in the retail sector, virtual reality. And the technology alone is not sufficient. So it's actually other areas, for example, I just indicated here, picked it randomly, for example, risk management, governance, also, for example, benefit realization, solution delivery, could be all areas which are important as well to mature, to improve within the enterprise, to avail of that possibility of, for example, virtual reality. And the advantage of this is not only that we have that knowledge base on capabilities, dynamic capabilities, but we also can model that. And that's what I tried to indicate here on the bottom. So we can describe like a process, we can describe the interventions, the activities which were suggested, which were happening to, for example, introduce virtual reality in a retail store. So what are the things which have to be changed, which have been done, and we can codify that, we can model that, and we can put that into a repository and as a digital transformation path. And now, and I got a little bit further on this, so I used some architectural models, which one of my colleagues and team did around smart cities. So basically 2 architectures. One was the current architecture. The other one is the target of future architecture. So that's typically a model how it looks when we're talking about enterprise architecture. Looks quite complicated, complex around this, but that's not so important at the moment. we can model that. We can represent strategic elements. We can represent indicators. We can also represent data and application components within that. So that's a well-established way of modeling enterprises. But more interesting on this is, so basically the difference between these two architectures and the evolving, the changes within that and how they happen. So what happened basically on certain configurations here have changed, and what introduced, what drove these changes. That's interesting. That's basically, so was it people, processes, technology, what were the drivers, what was changed, what practices were changed, what capabilities were matured. That's the really interesting one on looking at these digital transformation paths, to extract them, codify them in the repository. So that's probably when we have the templates, that's probably but to observe and to really follow the transformation. And that can be then guidance for others. So at least examples, so others did that, but also if we have many of these use cases, we can compare them, we can analyze them. We also know kind of how different companies, maybe different sectors, have responded to challenges. So we believe that actually there's a lot in there when we codified these digital transformation paths, and we can do that. And we can basically observe with companies together what they do, what I would call maybe interventions, what interventions the companies did to drive digital transformation forward. And it can be very small areas, like, for example, virtual reality or prediction model or data analyzing or changing some routine in an operational process. So it doesn't need to be a complex area. So it can be many small parts of a digital transformation, and all of that, adding that together into a repository that gives that richness of actually analyzing them. And we can model that. That's what we do. We can model enterprise architecture, we can describe that, and we can put that into a repository. One thing, if we have that in a repository, what we could do is also visualize that in various ways. And some other colleagues from the Perform project, from the Digital Retail project, they did a prototype on visualizing it. So it's also just illustrative, indicative examples. So for example, if we want to have something like a 360 customer view, we could start with that challenge. We could look then on the challenges or the things what need to be done, for example, data integration, data visualization, and then we can basically zoom into the next challenge. So we want to have the 360 view. We can then look into data integration, what needs to be done then. And so we can basically kind of line up and visualize the path around this and the connection between the different activities, the different interventions. And we believe that's then useful to really plan and to look at this and really have different paths. And on the end, of course, somewhere we have something like a transformation map around this on different activities and how they basically in different companies. And if you have something like this, it's relatively straightforward to analyze, compare them, of course, within our portal around this. And that links then to the capabilities, and we can enrich our existing IBI portal where we have benchmarking data, where we have already digital assessments in there, to something like that digital guidebook where we have digital transformation paths, and where we can structure that around this. And I want to leave it to this and maybe go back to this slide here as key slide around the idea what digital transformation paths could be in relation to also looking at capabilities and bringing these capabilities along the process. But yeah, so I know the Coffee and Talk are always very short presentations, so I leave it to that more like as an input for a discussion around this importance or suggestions. So at the moment, it's the concept, it's forming around this. We're discussing a lot about digital transformation path. We're not there in the end yet, but I believe there's a lot of possibilities and opportunities in digital transformation paths to analyze and understanding which are the drivers of digital transformation in a more systematic way. In this way, what I just tried to at least as an idea explain a little bit. So I open the floor for comments, suggestions, questions. Yeah.
Hi, Markus. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, maybe I have one. First of all, thanks for the very nice presentation. And, I thought it's very interesting to see this way of deep diving into a particular area of the digital transformation pathway. Like, for example, dealing with data, you have data visualization, and then you can see what's inside that. I think it's good because it's not only for example, data scientists, but it's also valuable for managers to see what's involved in that kind of daily work. So to me, that was very interesting. And the other thing is, I don't know if you have thought of this kind of analysis or identifying these kind of results whenever you you leverage the framework with a company. But for example, one of the things I was dealing during the Perform project was there was a case in Ruby where they had to decide for a third-party solution or maybe to some kind of in-house development for that particular problem. And I was just wondering if this framework can also help in, for example, mapping what kind of resources they would need, or how, for example, human resources, but also what kind of technologies they would need to hire or to invest in order to come up with a solution for a particular problem in-house versus mapping those dimensions in third-party solutions. I was just wondering if this could be maybe interesting to investigate. So in summary, to what extent your digital transformation pathway can help companies is also in also deciding for developing in-house versus acquiring cloud solutions, for example. I was just my thoughts. I was wondering if
a really good question and a really interesting thought around this and how far we want to go with these digital transformation paths. So how much prescriptive we have in there. And I would say now kind of initially, probably not in that way that basically like that's a ranking on kind of in-house outsourcing. Or so it's more like looking at the capability. For example, there's a sourcing capability in there or human resource capability. So how that's organized and how it's actually like, is it already established? Are the processes established to actually determine this? So it's not on that level of really prescriptive of you need to do A or be exactly in this way. It's more like basically it's actually are the capabilities established to do that in a right way. So that's basically where the maturity and the capability part is quite important, because we really need to be also like there's only so much we can prescribe, we can go forwards, and also these decisions, of course, they are highly context dependent and they also change over time. So, but I think that the comment is really an excellent question or comment around this. It really raises the question, how far do we really want to go with this and prescribing a certain content? But I think it's also important, and for example, in this scenario, what you mentioned, so to then observe which capabilities are important to make such a decision and how mature they should be, or should they be, is there a certain level of maturity? Is there a certain way of actually ranking them, linking them into a time? So it raises a lot of thoughts, at least around that.
Sure.
Can I build on top of that?
Sure.
Markus, I mean, I can see how this sort of really applies to multinationals and larger companies. How do you feel, or have you any feedback on how this can be applied in small companies, SMEs?
Yes, so that's basically where we use the innovation voucher program. So in smaller companies, and that's why I think kind of, so it doesn't need to be a huge digital transformation for the whole enterprise. It can be a certain area, for example, something on marketing or something on customer engagement in a different way. So a technology opportunity and changing this, for example, a prediction model or an analytics component with LinkedIn together, and these smaller pieces, more contained, more scoped project, of course they give also insight. And if you have loads of them, of course we can link them together, and that's basically what we with that visualization. So a challenge, of course, it raises then several other challenges, and if we have kind of templates, examples for other challenges, we can link them together around it. So I see that kind of on the end, these smaller contained digital transformation paths, these give building blocks which we can line together.
Great. No, it's interesting. It gives a context to a lot of the different work that's going on.
Yeah, and that's kind of also where we want to get to, is basically so that context and kind of having a way to capture the information around it, so around digital transformation. So to make that really explicit, put that into a repository and be able to analyze that. So because when we looked at what IBI, for example, a couple of years ago had, was a lot of data on maturity assessments, and that was extremely valuable to compare, to analyze around this. So, and if we can do something like this, different contexts, understanding this, maybe why people do that, but at least that people do ABC, that's already extremely valuable and extremely insightful. Any other comments?
Yes, yes, I have a comment.
Sure.
Thanks, Markus, for the presentation. I just want to maybe have a question around the data quality, because sometimes when we see these new technologies, these new digital technologies that different enterprises are using, so we see that we are collecting a lot of data that we need to understand and to analyze, and also to see the value of this data. And this is, I think, that one of the challenges that we have. Also, we have seen in some of the innovation vouchers with some companies that they wanted to implement this, for example, say AI and machine learning algorithms, and they have the idea that it's just using these new technologies. But how do you see, and the reality is that, for example, they don't have enough quality, for example. We know that the machines are not learning. They can learn from a small amount of data, but the idea is that these algorithms need this information in like a lot of quantity. So, but also the quality is important. So I know that you are also an expert in the data quality. So how do you see that connection between the data quality? I don't know if one step of this roadmap of this digital transformation. So how do you think that this can be connected, the data quality with these digital transformation paths?
Yeah, so that would be, for example, at least one capability, maybe it touches other ones as well, but something around data management, data governance, probably around this. So how do you organize data quality, which processes, routines you have in place to ensure data governance, data quality around this? And basically, so that's a really good example, I think. So if you have an organization, for example, there is a technology opportunity, probably plenty of technology opportunities on analyzing customer data. I just make that up now around this. However, if the customer interaction data, the customer transaction data is of very low quality, that the technology opportunity doesn't help. So basically, somewhere along that digital transformation path, there need to be the capability, and maybe really early in that digital transformation path, so increase the capability of data governance, data management, to increase the outcome of data quality. So basically that you increase the quality level of your data, and then the next one is maybe putting technology integration, enterprise architecture management into place to actually realize the benefits on the end. But that's exactly a really nice example where you can start planning around various initiatives, various capability increases in maturity, and then basically you realize the possibility. And that's what we hear from, as I said, from smaller companies as well. The technology opportunities are there, that's not a question, but to make them really beneficial for the company, and there might be lots of other things that need to be in place to actually realize and exploit that opportunity of digitalization. And I think that's the key motivator behind this, to put that into a timeline, to put that into a process as a path, to really look at several other things which need to be done around that.
Okay, thank you very much, Markus.
Thanks, Viviana. I would have expected to comment on, I know the architectural diagrams are coming from you on this other, this slide. So, but thanks. I hope you didn't mind that I used your diagrams, but I made them in a digital transformation path.
Of course, you can use them. It's the results of our research.
Thanks, Viviana. Okay, I think Paul or Marco in IVI, you have a.
Hi, Markus. Thanks for the presentation. And actually, I'm building on the question of Viviana, because yeah, you're showing the digital transformation path, and you were mentioning even before some of the new challenges that are coming, like ethical aspects, like the trustworthiness, and of course that on AI. Mainly, but also on the other aspects. So there are kind of new challenges that probably they are mapped to new capabilities, or just looking at old capabilities in a different way. And there are other capabilities that are already there, but they are increasing, let's say, in value. We have seen with the cybersecurity, so safety, security, that is becoming more and more important. So kind of challenges that new challenges that are changing, becoming more important. On the other hand, there is also spontaneous kind of movement. For example, COVID has accelerated the use of video conferencing. So, or for example, the healthcare sector, you know, is the use of e-health, and so that also remote conferencing and these kind of things, so that there is kind of a spontaneous movement that is helping the digital transformation path. So how do you see these two, let's say, aspects? So one, new challenges or challenges that become different or increase, and the other help to the digital transformation because of the situation in general that is helping it. How does it fit in the digital transformation path and in the model that you are discussing?
Yeah, also a really good question or comment around this. So basically, I think the challenge, so first of all, a challenge might be also an opportunity. So some external factors happened. And then basically, so a digital transformation path responds to this. And of course, like challenges and opportunities changing over time. And so there's not a list which is complete. So it basically also we can add them to it. But more important, I think, is the second comment what is said is basically these capabilities changing, and also the maturity level within that. Also basically the practices might change. So what haven't existed before might exist now. And so that's also why these capabilities are actually evolving. So they are not static. They are basically kind of, we're trying to describe what we know at the moment. But of course, like given time, it might change as well, different capabilities. So it's also fluid. But I think one of the big advantages what we have a starting point with these capabilities, what we have. And we can actually describe the observations, what we talk with companies, what happens at a digital transformation with that way, with the terminologies, with the language, with the capability maturity framework around this, and capture the aspects. And I think when we do this, we actually we identify these missing pieces, these new opportunities, new changes in the capabilities as well. And then we need to, of course, adjust the capability maturity model, but also maybe the list and the challenges, opportunities on it. But it gives us a way to describe at least what we see and what we observe, but also identify if it's not exactly right anymore, if it doesn't cater for this. I hope, Marco, that addresses what you.
Yes. And just the other aspect was that so the helps from the external, that as for example they use. Of course, we don't want to do that COVID happens, and but somehow help in the digital transformation. So how can we use that to our own advantage? the fact that there are external factors that are pushing somehow digital transformation. This also should be maybe captured in the maturity framework that you are talking about.
Exactly. So that's why it's challenge or opportunities. So like typically like the pandemic was one which probably no one foresee in that way, or and which drove a lot of digital transformation in all sectors, I think, around this. But of course, we don't want to like that. That's a really exceptional event. So we want to see the kind of the events, opportunities, driver things, what happens where basically it drives and it triggers digital transformation. And that alone is already interesting to just know what are the key drivers, what are drivers in general. And so also like, so it's not that we basically aim to have all like one model, which is the best practice. It's basically examples of digital transformation, and by having them we can compare them, and that gives a lot of insights into how digital transformation happens and what is beneficial around this. So I know it's already now 2 o'clock, and usually we keep it to half an hour. So I hand over to Grace, but I think it also shows the richness of that discussion. So we probably could discuss another while around this. So digital transformation paths, they won't go away because I think there's a lot in there. And I think digital transformation is so important that basically companies and challenges and researchers will deal with that and looking into that. So now, yeah, I hand over to Grace to close the session.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Markus. And just very quickly, a reminder of the ways to keep in touch: our Twitter, our LinkedIn, and the website. And also a reminder that next Thursday, September 30th, we're having our next webinar in the IBI webinar series, and this will be focusing on digital retail and how retailers can remain competitive even post-COVID as they recover from the pandemic. So we look forward to seeing you all there.